When I was a child, I killed a child my age and threw his body down an old well. Then I escaped from the mountain village, pretended to be an orphan, and hid in the Welfare Institute in the city. 12 years later, police found the body in the ancient well, but forensic experts concluded that the remains in the well were those of an adult man. I left the village for many years. Once again, heard news from home. It was the bad news that my mother fell ill and passed away. Carrying pain and regret, I still returned to that familiar land. The villagers heard that I was returning and all came. Their cold eyes and heavy criticism made me suffocate. This house is a nest of snakes and rats. No one is good. No wonder no one in that family has a good ending. Men are missing, women are dying of illness. I was startled, catching the key point in the words. The sick woman who died was obviously my mother. So the missing man is my father? The abusive, gambling-addicted father is missing again? I was surprised when suddenly I felt a chill down my spine as if someone was staring at me. Turning around, just in time to meet the village chief's cold eyes. My heart suddenly ached. The child I had killed that year was his son, Hu Hoa. The intense feeling of guilt urged me to walk faster, almost running back home. Entering the door, the cold, desolate sight of the house hit my eyes, accompanied by a faint smell of rotting flesh. In a moment of overwhelming sadness, I rushed into the bedroom with red eyes. On the simple wooden bed, I saw my mother had been dead for many days, her face swollen and covered with gangrene. "Mom, I'm home. Sorry, Mom. Sorry." I cried like rain, knelt down beside the bed. My mistake that year caused my mother to be implicated, isolated, and die without anyone willing to help with the burial. It's midsummer now. The body will decompose badly if left any longer. I tried to hold back the pain and started to prepare for my mother's funeral. While moving the body and replacing the rotten mattress, I was surprised to discover large letters written in running blood on the wooden bed. The scattered, crooked handwriting was clearly written in an extremely fragile state, piece by piece. This is the message my mother left me, because my mother knew that only I could take care of her body and clean up her things. The blood-red writing was a warning to me from my mother that I should stay away from the village chief's revenge. But in this remote village, if the village chief wanted to take action, I would have been dead by the time I entered the village. Or is Mom reminding me to be wary of something else in the village? At the same time, I still had a doubt. Who was the person who knew I was in the orphanage and told me about my mother's death? What was that person's purpose? The following days, I finished preparing the ceremony for my mother, and the last of my worries disappeared. For years, I've been plagued by nightmares, memories of murder replaying in my mind. I looked out the window at the sky and called the police. "Hello, I want to turn myself in. I once killed a child whose body was dumped in the village's old well." About an hour later, police sirens sounded in the village. At that moment, I felt liberated again. The rock that had been weighing heavily on my heart for 12 years was finally lifted. I walked out of the house and saw 3 policemen getting out of the car, led by a middle-aged man with a stern face and straight figure, followed by 2 young policemen. The leading police officer stepped forward and asked me, "This is your first time in Lingyu village, so it will take some time. My surname is Kin. You can call me Captain Kin. Did you just report the case and turn yourself in?"
I was a bit stunned and surprised when Mr. Tan said this was his first time in the village, but I quickly returned to the main topic, nodding. Yes, when I was 10 years old, while arguing with a villager, I accidentally killed him, whose body was in an old well on the mountain. Mr. Tan looked at me attentively and recounted in detail the incident that caused the conflict between the two of them. I just remembered and told the child I killed was named Hu Hoa, the village chief's son. He relies on his family's power and often bullies me. The day the incident happened, he called me to go fishing in the mountain stream. I had to stack rocks to block the water flow to create a trap, but I didn't do it properly, so a rockfish escaped. Hu Hoa got mad, scolded me, and even called my dad useless, saying that my dad had stolen things from his house. I was so angry that I argued back. Strangely, even though I hate my dad, when outsiders scold him, I can't help it. Hearing this, Mr. Tan's face softened a bit. Then, how did it turn into a fight? I said, I told Hu Hoa to stop insulting my family, but he felt provoked and immediately attacked me, forcing me to admit that my dad was a coward. I refused, so he picked up rocks and threw them at me. As I spoke, I lifted my bangs, revealing a clear scar on my forehead. I continued to be hit in the head with rocks. I was dizzy, hot blood gushed out, my eyes were red. I panicked and pushed him. The tiger could not stand, fell and hit the back of his head, bleeding profusely. He died on the spot. The back of his head was dented and wouldn't wake up no matter how much we called him. Saying this, my voice became small, full of regret. Mr. Tan sighed and led the way to the old well where he hid the body. I nodded silently and led the three of them up the mountain. When the villagers heard that the police were investigating the case, they all came to watch. Soon, I led Captain Kin and the two young policemen to the old well. Compared to 12 years ago, the area around the well is even more desolate. With weeds as high as a half-person, the mouth of the well is weathered, revealing traces of time, and covered with a large stone slab. Captain Tan pondered for a moment, then gave orders to his subordinates. Between the rocks, under the combined strength of two young policemen, the large stone covering the well's mouth was lifted. I walked closer, pointed down, and said, "The body is down there." Captain Tan bent down to look. A musty and rotten smell came straight up. The well was not too deep. One could vaguely see the broken rocks below. Watching for seconds, Captain Tan signaled a young policeman to fasten his safety rope and go down the well. Not long after the policeman got off, the village chief ran over, panting, calling out loudly towards Captain Tan. "Comrade police, misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Our village has never had a murder case." I raised my head in surprise, looking at the village chief in disbelief. Couldn't he accept the fact that his son was dead, still immersed in the illusion of being able to reunite with his son, refusing to face reality? I pursed my lips and lowered my voice. "Village chief, I'm sorry I killed Hu Hoa. Hu Hoa can't come back." The village chief was furious and shouted, "Shut up, it's not your turn to speak here." I was scared by his strong reaction and didn't dare say anything more.
Captain Chen continued to ask, "What exactly happened?" The village chief explained with a forced smile. Xiao Yang was still young and didn't understand what was going on at the time, and he thought it was a big deal when the children were playing around. Xiao Yang was my little brother. Even though I was only 10 years old at the time, I could still tell whether something was serious or not. The village chief ignored me, pointed at a mother and son approaching from behind, and said, "This is my wife and son. Look at Hu Hoa, still alive and well. You quickly call someone down the well. The sun is blazing hot. be careful of heat stroke. I was completely stunned, staring at Hu Hoa without blinking. From the young man's facial features, I could tell it was Hu Hoa, but why was he alive here? Very quickly, I noticed a few unusual things. In the middle of summer, the temperature was nearly 40 degrees, but Hu Hoa was still wearing a woolen hat that covered his head. Not only that, his dazed eyes and awkward, stiff movements made people feel like he was mentally... I thought of a possibility and walked over to ask, "Do you still remember me? I'm Han Yang. When we were kids, we used to catch fish together." Hu Hoa tilted his head to look at me. The next second, his mouth was drooling. He started babbling like a child learning to speak. I immediately stepped forward and snatched Hu Hua's woolen hat. Sure enough, behind the cover, the back of his head was deeply concave, looking very scary. I suddenly understood that after I pushed the tiger oasis down that year, he only fainted and was later saved by someone, but the serious head injury left him mentally disabled. Seeing Hu Hua's dazed appearance, I still felt choked up. It's my fault he ended up like this anyway. Suddenly, I felt a pain in my stomach and was kicked away. The village chief kicked me down and bent down to pick up my hat. His eyes looked at me filled with hatred. "Get out of here. Get out of this village. You all are trash. You are not welcome here." I clutched my stomach and writhed in pain. Just then, the shout from the police in the well broke the tense atmosphere. Captain Chin found human bones in the well. All eyes immediately turned to the well. Captain Tan ran to pull the policeman up. Before he could brush off the dust, the young policeman took out a piece of skull from the egg bag and said, "I found many other human bone fragments in the rubble below. Because I didn't have enough tools, I only brought up this skull. Although I'm not a forensic doctor, this skull definitely doesn't belong to a child, but to an adult." As soon as he finished speaking, the whole scene fell silent. I stood up, clutching my stomach, completely confused by one case upon another. Captain Chin was an experienced investigator and quickly realized the seriousness of the problem. To verify the victim's identity and cause of death, he immediately called for more people to assist. Then he turned to the village chief and told him a few things, asking that no one destroy the scene, then took me to ask him privately, "When Tiger Awa fainted that year, were you the one who threw the body? How are you sure his body is in the well?" My eyes flashed with hesitation, an internal struggle, not knowing whether to tell the truth. The person who threw the body that year was not me, but my mother. I didn't want my mother, who had just been laid to rest, to be cursed by the villagers, but the current situation couldn't be hidden anymore, I said in a low voice. At that time, seeing the Laker bleeding from the head, I was scared and ran home to tell my mother everything. My mother also panicked and told me to leave the village quickly. If my father knew, he would beat me to death. Then my mother prepared some money and food for me and told me to escape to the city that night. As for the fox's body, my mother said she would help me throw it into an abandoned well on the mountain. Hearing this, Captain Chin nodded his head and said, "So that's how it is. I had suspected the stone covering the well before. There's no way a 10-year-old child could lift something so heavy. It seems that when your mother arrived at the scene to deal with the aftermath, she discovered that Tiger Oasis was still alive and saved him." Captain Ching Chong's opinion and my thoughts, my mother is kind-hearted. Seeing the tiger cub injured, she certainly cannot ignore it. But surely she then suffered terrible wrath from the village chief's family. Captain Ching returned to the topic of the corpse in the well and asked, "So what do you know about that adult corpse? Any clues?" I shook my head like a rattlesnake. I always thought I killed Hu Hoa. As for who the adult's body in the well was, I really don't know. Captain Chin asked a few more questions, but did not get any clear clues. He turned back to the crowd of villagers, hoping to dig up more information.
About an hour later, police support arrived and began excavating the remains in the well. I was in no mood to gossip, just sat alone, hugging my knees under the big camphor tree. The village chief's strange actions kept coming back to mind. Even though I didn't kill Hu Hoa, him becoming mentally disabled is also related to me. Why doesn't the village chief hold people accountable instead of wanting to let things go? Is it because he intends to deal with me secretly, or is the corpse in the well related to the village chief? As I was lost in thought, the sun was setting in the west. The exhumation is almost complete. A young policeman came up to me and said, "There is something I need you to confirm." I did not understand what was going on and looked up at him. A look of sympathy flashed across his face as he explained. After searching the entire village, in the past 10 years, the only person missing was her father. This answer was completely beyond my expectations. I didn't know how to react for a moment. After a moment of calm, I mechanically followed the police to the ancient well. The first time I saw human remains with my own eyes, I instinctively felt nauseous, tried to suppress the feeling of discomfort. I focused my attention on the evidence beside the two skeletons, which contained rotten pieces of clothing, a broken rusty key, and a broken mechanical watch. Just a glance at that watch confirmed that this corpse was my father. Captain Chin asked, "How did you recognize it?" I pointed to the tarnished clock on the ground. This watch was a prize for winning the debate championship when my father was in school. With twin watches, my father always regarded them as his greatest pride. He wore them alternately, never leaving his side. Captain Chin's expression became more serious. He asked, "Does your father have a grudge against anyone in the village? Is there a conflict with the village chief?" Captain Chin also clearly felt that the village chief was very suspicious. I tried to recall my childhood memories, and after a while I shook my head in denial. No, although my father liked drinking and gambling, he never had any serious conflicts with anyone, and certainly not to the point of being murdered. But after I left the village, I don't know if my father had a relationship with anyone or not.
Captain Tan pondered for a moment and then said, "We will take your biological sample to do a blood test with the skeleton. If the body is indeed your father's, we will try to find out the truth and give him justice." I was filled with mixed emotions, and in the end, I just nodded silently. Not long after, the forensic doctor who had completed the preliminary examination of the body came to report. Captain Kin, based on the change in bone color and the degree of weathering of the skeleton, preliminarily judged that the deceased had been dead for about 10 years. Not many clues were collected at the scene, but there were many fractures all over the skeleton, and the fractures showed signs of blood seeping through. In my judgment, the victim was beaten to death by rocks by someone else, so the skull, sternum, and arm bones all had serious water stains. Although I had blamed my father, when I heard that he was beaten to death by someone alive, I still couldn't help but use myself. A barbaric punishment that was only seen in backward places appeared right before my eyes. Thinking of the village chief's strange actions, I was sure that there was some hidden reason behind my father's death. At this time, the sky was dark, and the mountain road returned at night. The district was very difficult to navigate. Captain Kin decided to temporarily suspend the investigation and continue tomorrow. Looking at the police car flashing its red lights, gradually disappearing into the distance, my heart was empty. Returning to the dilapidated house, everything was as hazy as in a dream. The guilt had tormented me for 12 years, but it turned out that the person was not dead. Yet in just a few days, I received consecutive news that my parents had passed away. In the midst of my chaotic thoughts, I remembered the words my mother left behind in blood and suddenly thought of a possibility. Could it be that my mother telling me to run away was related to my father's death? If so, she definitely knew the truth about his death. Maybe there were still clues left in the house. Thinking of this, I quickly started searching the house. Because the house was so poor, there was almost nothing solid, so I quickly found an old iron box in the corner of the house. Inside the box were a few miscellaneous items: certificates of merit from my father's school days, some handicrafts he made himself, and a pure white stuffed rabbit. I remembered when I was young, I used to wish there was a stuffed rabbit. It turned out that my mother had always remembered. In Taiyang, I found a black-covered diary with yellowed pages. The diary was written by my father. When I opened the worn-out diary, I realized it was a completely different father. The diary was very long, and many passages moved me deeply. June 25th, 2000. In 2000, I graduated. The life in the luxurious city, with its red lights and green wine, was truly attractive. But the more I studied, the more determined I was to return to my hometown where my mission lay. On May 1st, 2003, my little angel was born, round and extremely adorable. I named my child Hang Dung, hoping that he would be like a lotus flower in the mud, unstained. In August 2007, after returning to my hometown, I discovered that it was very difficult to integrate with the villagers. They were all cautious and wary of me. If I wanted to integrate, I had to shake off, abandon the intellectual appearance. It seems that relying on children to play cards is indispensable. In October 2010, I won the trust of the village chief and was accepted into the village mining team. But after only a few days of working, a mine accident suddenly occurred and the mine collapsed. I rescued a boy from the rubble. His house was at the west end of the village, opposite my house at the east end of the village. The boy was full of energy. I loved him very much. In his eyes, I saw myself when I had just graduated. Unfortunately, his right leg was crushed by a rock. The doctor said he would be disabled. May 1st, 2012. Today is the little angel's birthday, but he caused a big disaster. My wife was so panicked that she forced her to run away from the village at night. For Han De-young, this was probably the best choice for her. It's just that this separation might be permanent. When I received the news and went to the scene with my wife, I discovered that Hu Hoa was still alive. I really could secretly deal with the boy, but I couldn't just watch a child take his last breath. I took the Hoa to the village doctor's house and found the village chief, kneeling down to admit my mistake. My daughter caused trouble, and I, as a father, had to take responsibility. In June 2013, in order to collect 1 million yuan to compensate the village chief, I gave him all my fields, gardens, and valuables in the house, but the amount was still far from enough. So I signed a contract of self-denial. In this modern civilized society, I was probably one of the few people who became a slave. In April 2014, because of the contract of self-denial, the village chief's family trusted me more and more. And I also began to understand the core secret of the village mine. But there was one thing I didn't expect. The day I graduated from university was the unlock pod. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the coincidence of fate. My father's diary stopped here, 2014. That is, 11 years ago. Not long after, my father had an accident. Only then did I realize that perhaps I had completely misunderstood my father. From the diary, I felt a fatherly love as high as a mountain, full of love. But I still could not understand why my father deliberately created a terrible father image that made me always fear and hate him. And what was the so-called truth that my father had mentioned? Was it related to his death? For some reason, a strange feeling of excitement suddenly arose in my heart. I was urged to clarify the truth of the matter. Just as I was lost in thought, a loud bang suddenly broke the silence in the house.
I ran to the bedroom in panic and found that the glass window had been broken by someone. On the table near the window was a crumpled piece of paper. I cautiously picked it up. Inside the package was an old mechanical watch. The dial was still intact, the hands were still moving. It was the other one in the twin watches that my father had once given me. On the watching wrapping paper was a scrawled line, "If you want to know the truth about your father's death, come find me behind the mountain." My heart pounded, and I hurriedly looked out the window, only to see a figure sneaking into the forest.
Walking alone into the dark jungle in the middle of the night, it would be confusing to say I wasn't afraid, but thinking about the matter related to my father's death, I mustered up all my courage to chase after the shadow that had disappeared. I turned on my phone's flashlight and tried to find my way through the dense trees as I walked. Because I was only wearing a t-shirt and shorts, my arms and legs were torn in many places by the trees. With great difficulty, I climbed to the middle of the mountain, but the figure had disappeared. In front of me was an open space, connected to a dirt road leading far away, surrounded on all four sides by dense trees, and I could retreat in any direction. "Who is it? What do you want to tell me?" I shouted, but only an echo answered. The low battery warning on my phone rang, interrupting my train of thought. All day, my mind was haunted by the skeleton in the well, forgetting to charge my phone. If the phone turned off, I would be left in the dark. However, what made me suspicious was why the mysterious person who had taken the trouble to lead me here suddenly disappeared. From the way that person carefully wrapped the watch, I felt good intentions. He could have completely wrapped the watch in paper and broken the glass, but he chose to use a rock to break the glass first and then put the wrapping paper on the table. And from the well-preserved condition of the watch, I realized that the person treasured it and respected my father. I did not leave in a hurry, staying in the dirt field for more than 10 minutes until my phone turned off because of the battery. In the middle of the night, in the gloomy mountains and forests, I began to feel cold all over. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw a flash of light at the end of the dirt road in the distance. Weak. How could anyone live in the middle of such a deep mountain and forest? I thought maybe I could ask to charge my phone. I followed the light and discovered that it was not a house, but a mine. No wonder there was a dedicated dirt road on the mountain, probably for mining. "Is anyone there?" I called out loudly, but only heard the sound of wind blowing from the mine. I laughed at myself for going to mine at midnight. Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly remembered my father's diary. I remembered that he had said he had deliberately asked to work at the mine. Could the secret my father was looking for be here? I swallowed hard, tried to stay calm, and decided to go in to investigate. The dim yellow light only illuminated the pitch-black cave entrance. I had no choice but to follow the cliff, slowly walking deeper. The surrounding was eerily quiet, only the sound of footsteps crunching on the crushed rocks and the echoing sound of dripping water. I walked nervously for about 5 minutes. After passing a gentle slope, I saw it again, light. Both happy and cautious, I walked to the end of the tunnel. In front of me was a vertical elevator. The elevator door was locked with a mechanical combination lock. My heart was pounding as hard as it could. Below the elevator was where the truth I was looking for was hidden. But how should I get in? Oh, the metal lock couldn't be broken with stone. Suddenly, a light flashed in my head. I remembered my father's joke in the diary. My university graduation date was the date code. Could it be that my father's graduation date was the unlock code? Unfortunately, when I read the diary, I was only interested in the content. I didn't pay attention to the specific date. Fortunately, in China, universities usually hold graduation ceremonies at the end of June. I tried the numbers one by one. When I turned to 0625, which was June 25th, the lock clicked open. I pulled the iron door and entered the vertical elevator. Inside the elevator, there were only 2 buttons, one red and one green. I pressed my ear to the elevator floor and listened for a while. Confirming that there was no movement below, I pressed the green button below. The elevator began to descend, taking me to the underground mine. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, the surrounding scene startled me. Countless detonators were stacked. They were probably for mining, but the number was really too terrifying. There were lights on both sides of the underground tunnel, and the visibility was quite clear. I turned a corner, and the scene before my eyes froze me in place. Inside the mine, people had dug out a space that resembled an underground square. Inside were a series of cages, more than a dozen of them. Most of the cages were empty, except for 3 that held 3 young girls. Dressed in a fashionable and neat manner, they were completely out of place with the backward, dark scenery of this village. In the isolated underground space, there was no distinction between day and night, but at this moment, the 3 girls weren't sleeping. They just looked extremely haggard. When they saw me approaching, they raised their heads absent-mindedly, but there was no expression on their faces. Just, I felt like something had hit me. Human trafficking, the terrible phrase flashed to my mind. I ran up to a girl and tried to talk. "Can I talk to you? Why am I locked here?" The girl with the ponytail slowly raised her head, her empty eyes staring at me, not saying a word. Looking at her like she was losing her mind, my heart felt like it was being stabbed by needles. I tried to communicate with the other 2 girls. One person also had a dull look, unable to speak anymore. The last person, although speaking slowly, was fortunately still able to communicate. She tried to open her mouth, her voice hoarse. "My name is Chung Ya. I was drugged and kidnapped here. I'll tell you right now, don't be afraid. I will definitely rescue you guys." At that moment, my heart ached. Is this the secret my father risked his life to investigate? That now was not the time to think further. I quickly looked around for the key. Just then, there was a sound from the elevator. My heart immediately tightened. There was only one way out of the tunnel. In an emergency, I had to hide behind a pile of detonators. The elevator just stopped. 2 men staggered out, their faces red, their eyes dull, obviously having drunk a lot of alcohol. A guy at the head asked, "Why is the elevator stopping down here?" I was sweating with fear. I never expected someone to come down here so late. So after getting on the elevator, I just let it stop in the basement. The fat guy beside him said, "Is the captain back?" The leader said the night shift duty was assigned to us. He finished drinking and went to sleep. After saying that, he called out a few times inside, but no one answered. His expression became serious. "You stay here. I'll go inside and check." The guy with the first poke sobered halfway. Both of them drew daggers from their belts. The glint of steel sent a chill down my spine. As I was wondering what to do, I heard arguing inside. "You F? Let go. I'll beat you to death." It's Chung Ya. She was mad and bit the fat guy. The fat guy screamed in pain, but no matter how much he punched and kicked, she wouldn't let go. The leader heard the noise and ran in to see. I understand. This is Chung Ya deliberately creating an opportunity for me to escape. No doubt what awaited her would be the most brutal tortures. I suppressed my anger and ran to the elevator. I cannot waste this precious opportunity. In my heart, I will definitely come back to save Chung Ya and the girls. Once I reached the upper level of the mine, I ran headlong out of the tunnel. Not long after, I heard chasing and cursing behind me, but because those 2 drank too much, they couldn't catch up. I got out of the mine. It was dawn.
I ran home to charge my phone to call the police, but the sight before me left me speechless. I don't know who burned my house down, Half of the house collapsed, only burnt black walls and piles of ashes remained. Obviously, this was a deliberate act by the villagers. After I reported my father's murder to the police yesterday, the villagers wanted to kill him to silence him. They didn't need any evidence, just suspected that I knew the secret of human trafficking. They were ready to kill me. Thinking of this, I shivered. If it weren't for the mysterious person warning me yesterday, I probably would have burned to death in my sleep. Even if the police came to investigate, the villagers would say it was an accident. I know I shouldn't panic. The police will come back to investigate today. As long as I can meet Captain Ton, I can bring this whole gang to light. While waiting, I was on edge. Finally, the police siren sounded again in the village. I rushed out to stop the car immediately. When he saw me, the village chief's eyes flashed with cruelty, but he quickly returned to calm. I ignored the looks of the villagers around me, pouring out my anger. I told him the whole story of human trafficking that was going on secretly in this village. After hearing that, Captain Ton's expression turned serious. Human trafficking is a serious crime that is particularly prosecuted by the state. If what I say is true, this could be the most serious case in years. Captain Ton immediately asked me to lead the way to the mine. The closer I got to the mine, the more uneasy I felt. Although the village chief tried to stop him, he did nothing extreme. I understand that if the crime is exposed, half the men in this village will be shot dead. But he still kept his composure. Why? As I led the police team down the mine, I finally understood why the village chief was so confident. The underground space I discovered last night has disappeared without a trace. At the deepest part of the mine, there are no iron bars, no vertical elevators, only unloaded minerals and a few mine cars for disposal. How is this possible? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Tried to pound on the cliff, hoping to find a hidden passage. The village chief sneered, stepped out from behind, and said to Captain Chin, "How can you believe the words of a juvenile criminal? This child has had violent tendencies since he was young. Many children in the village have been bullied by him. His parents couldn't stand it either, so they kicked him out of the house. Oh yeah, I also heard that last night he sleepwalked and burned down our house. He probably can't tell what's real and what's a dream anymore." I immediately and firmly denied. "No, it's definitely not a dream. The scratches from walking through the forest last night are still on my body. That's right, there was a girl in prison named Trul Young. Just check it against the missing persons database, and I'm sure what I said will be confirmed." The village chief snorted coldly. "How many people named Trul Young are there in this country? Is it true that when someone goes missing, we blame our village? Maybe he just found a name on the internet and then framed this village. Since being chased away, he has always held resentment in his heart. But I opened my mouth, not expecting this village chief to be so cunning. It's no wonder he was at the head of such a large human trafficking network." "Captain Ton, I am willing to take legal responsibility. The room where the girls came from is definitely under this mine." The village chief interrupted angrily. "Enough! How long do you want to cause trouble? Can one sentence of yours command the entire police system?" Having said that, the village chief aggressively approached me. Captain Chen immediately stood in front of me and said sternly, "Whether there is human trafficking or not, we will investigate clearly." The village chief grit his teeth and said, "Captain, don't be fooled by this child's appearance. He is a devil. My foolish son was harmed miserably by him. Give him to me. Consider it as returning justice to my son." Having said that, the village chief was about to drag me away. The people following behind him also began to prepare to take action. Captain Ton shouted, "What are you guys going to do?" The experienced police era made the crowd momentarily falter, and the village chief also withdrew his hand. Captain Ton continued, "If you want compensation or justice, then take it to court. I currently suspect that Han Duong's father's murder is related.
so we need to bring her to the police station for investigation." The village chief's expression changed continuously. Then he threatened in a low voice, "That's not appropriate. She committed a crime in the village and must be dealt with according to the village's rules." The villagers immediately joined in and surrounded me and the policeman. The two young policemen following Tan also put their hands on their holsters, ready to draw their guns at any moment. Even though we have the advantage in weapons, if we are surrounded by a large number of people, if the village chief really decides to take the risk, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to live alive. Captain Chin did not panic at all, looking straight into the village chief's eyes. "You should understand the consequences of attacking the police. If we don't come back, the next time it will not be the police, but the provincial armed guards who come here. I understand a father's feelings, but the murder case is the most important right now. Wait until the cause of Hans Yang's father's death is clearly investigated. I will give you a satisfactory explanation." Truly an experienced person. He used both overwhelming force and gentle persuasion to give the village chief an excuse to retreat with honor. The village chief's face turned pale, then ashen. He hesitated for a few seconds and then signaled for the villagers to retreat. Then he looked at me with cold eyes. "Once you leave the village, don't ever come back. If you dare to set foot here, don't blame me for being cruel. Even if I am shot, I will demand justice for my son." Under the angry gazes of the villagers, Captain Tan took me into the police car and left the village. On the car, the atmosphere was extremely tense. Finally, Captain Tan spoke up. "Don't come back to the village again. I feel that the village chief really wants to kill you." I was silent, knowing in my heart that if it weren't for Captain Tan, I would have died in that village. But when I thought of Trun Yang's desperate face pleading for help, I couldn't help but doubt it. Captain Tan sighed and gave me a business card with his phone number on it. "If anything happens, just contact me." I nodded agreeably, thanking the captain. He waved his hand. "I was curious how you escaped from the village as a child. As far as I can see, the village has only one entrance and exit, which is always guarded." "How do I escape?" I replied. "There is still a small path, but it has to go over a dangerous cliff. Only children can follow. Adults will fall and die." Captain Tan nodded in understanding. At that moment, I suddenly thought of something from my childhood. In addition to beating me, my father often mentioned the orphanage in the city intentionally or unintentionally, as if he wanted to plant an idea in me. Every time my mother took me up the mountain to pick herbs, she always emphasized that small path. Now I realize that my parents seem to have had a secret conspiracy, wanting me to run away from home and go to an orphanage in the city.
When I arrived at the district, Captain Tan arranged for me to stay at a hotel next to the police station. After saying goodbye to him, I took a nap to regain my strength. After recovering my strength, I tried to recall my experience of entering the mine twice to find the difference. What is the biggest difference? Light is light. The first time I entered the mine was at night, wandering in the dark. Instinctively thought there was only one way, but I remember clearly, before finding the vertical elevator, I passed through a clearly downward slope. The second time I led Captain Tan into the cave. The road is completely flat. I suddenly understood that it was the village chief's trick. He had laid two paths in the mine. One is the path to legal mining. The other is the path to hell. And the other hidden entrance is very well camouflaged. The minerals can be moved to cover the cave entrance. Thinking of this, I clenched my fists, preparing to call Captain Tan.
But I quickly realized that all of this was just speculation for which I had no concrete evidence. Captain Kin could not possibly rely on my one-sided words to get support from the provincial armed forces. Furthermore, with yesterday's shocking attack, the village chief and his men must have been on guard and probably moved the girl somewhere else. Thinking of this, I put down the phone. If I wanted to overthrow this criminal village, I could only find evidence and then call for help from the armed police. That's right, my father has been investigating for so many years. He must have got the evidence to shut up the murderer. Where did he hide that evidence? The house's contents must have been ransacked by the village chiefs. My father's diary was written very discreetly, probably to avoid discovering his plan. If I were in my dad's shoes, where would I leave the clues? Yes, the well. The well where my father was crushed to death by a rock. My father pursued the truth for half his life. He must have left something behind there. I jumped out of bed, deciding to return to the village. It was impossible to sneak through the village gate. Even with Captain Tan's help, it was not enough. There is only a path along the cliff which is called a road, but is actually just a dangerous crevice of rocks. I did not hesitate, thinking about how my father dared to be a virgin in a den of crime for so many years. I also decided to take a risk. But I didn't act rashly and ran to the outdoor gear store, bought climbing shoes, gloves, and a backpack. Returning to the cliffside of the village, looking at the thread-like path between the steep cliffs, I couldn't help but feel my legs shaking. Below is a deep abyss of nearly 100 meters. Just one wrong step and your bones will be crushed. I waited until dusk to start climbing, using the darkness to hide and reduce the chance of being detected. This process was much more difficult than I thought. The footings are too narrow, making it difficult to maintain balance. Thanks to my climbing gear, I was able to continue. Halfway through, there was a loud crack as the rock under my right foot shattered, causing my body to instantly lose balance. Fear filled my whole body, almost like a survival instinct, making me stomp my left foot, swing my body like I was swinging, clinging to the other side of the cliff, luckily escaping danger by a hair's breadth. When I finally made it to the ground, I collapsed from exhaustion, my leg muscles cramping uncontrollably. But I didn't have time to celebrate. Because the middle part of the cliff was destroyed, there was no way to go back the old way now. The only way was to risk my life to find evidence and ask the police for help. After resting for a while, I immediately ran to the old well. The longer you stay in the village, the more dangerous it becomes. It was dark and most of the villagers were asleep. I quietly entered the well, which was full of jagged rocks. Although the bloodstains have been faded by time, they are almost invisible. But just looking at those sharp and heavy stones, my heart still skipped a beat. A man who wanted to expose the crime was beaten to death with these rocks. I turned on my phone's flashlight and searched the bottom and sides of the well. I focus on finding hidden, easily overlooked places. Finally, after removing the moss on the cliff, I saw 2 different numbers on the rock, 7 and 1. Seeing that scene, I was struck by lightning, standing still, unable to calm down. I know that is the message my father left me, a code that lasted 12 years. 7 and 1 are my birthday, July 1st. It is hard to imagine that while being hit by rocks and breaking my bones, my father still struggled to carve these two numbers. I wiped away the tears that were welling up in my eyes. Now was not the time to be sad. I followed the prepared rope and climbed out of the well. I knew what Dad meant. As a birthday present that year, a stuffed rabbit. In the cover of darkness, I returned to the burned house. Entering the charred warehouse, I found a smoke-blackened iron box. Luckily, there was an iron box protecting it. The fur on the stuffed rabbit was burned, but not completely burned up. I tore the stuffed rabbit apart, peeling off each layer of fur. As expected, I found a small notebook. The notebook is only half the size of a hand, but the inside of the shoe is full of writing. I ignored the dirty surroundings and sat down in an empty corner to read each line. The handwriting is small, but the content is shocking. Many things my father did not dare to write in his diary, he wrote in this book. My name is Lu Song, a normal villager of Lingyu, and also the only university student who came out of the village's mountains. Since I was little, I wondered why in the village there were almost no girls, but when the men came of age, they all got beautiful wives. There are even old men who marry young wives after their wives die. At that time, I asked my father. He said our village was beautiful and the girls from other villages competed to come here to get married, and said that when I grew up, I would understand. I remember what Dad said. When I went to college and read similar news, I realized the truth. The village girl was kidnapped to be a wife. It is not strange that girls after marriage always have dull eyes. That is a sign of being drugged. Only after giving birth do they gradually come to their senses because the child has tied their lives together. 4 years in college, the more I learned and knew, the more disgusted I became with what my village had been doing. In a civilized society, this breeding ground for crime must be exposed and eradicated. After graduating, I left the city and returned to my hometown, determined to expose the crimes of this village. Undoubtedly, I will become a traitor and be cursed by my relatives as an ungrateful and treacherous person, but I have no regrets. While collecting evidence, I discovered that the crimes in the village were more terrible than I had imagined. The kidnapped girl will be imprisoned in the dungeon under the village mine. The villagers will use all kinds of cruel tricks to destroy the girl's psychological defenses. Not only did they beat and drug them, they also took turns raping the new girls. As long as the men are in the human trafficking ring, they can carry out violence against the girls in the dungeon.
They call this process yielding, to the point that every night when I approached the mine, I could hear the heart-wrenching screams of the girls. But this is not even the most brutal crime. Because of the deeply rooted patriarchal ideology of the villagers, many people, when giving birth to a daughter, will cruelly take the child to the mountains or drown it in a lake. The mouth is called the mountain god or water god sacrifice. Native girls in the village, like my wife, can be counted on the fingers of one hand. This is also the reason why there are almost no girls in the village. But in order to maintain their species, those demons still continue to trick and capture girls. The only way to break this vicious cycle of the village can be done from the root. But my secret investigation made the village chief suspicious.
He took away my right to leave the village and spread rumors throughout the village that I was a cable thief and a fraud. I went with the flow and pretended to be a drunkard and gambler in their eyes. But collecting core evidence and finding a way to get it out is a big challenge. So I made a selfish decision to pass this mission on to my daughter. I often beat and scolded her, making her gradually distance herself and fear me. Then again, constantly sow in its heart beautiful images of city life, sowing the seeds for its escape from home. My wife played the role of secret support, showing the trail out of the village. The path was on a steep cliff, barely wide enough for children to pass through, and was out of sight of the village. Once I have gathered enough evidence, I will hide it in my daughter's stuffed rabbit toy for her to take out of the village. I just didn't expect that before the evidence was collected, my daughter would have a conflict with the village chief's son, accidentally pushing him down and seriously injuring him. My wife immediately panicked, fearing that the village chief would take revenge on her daughter. So she quickly let her escape from the village that night. When I heard this news, I was both happy and sorry. Happy that my daughter will start a new life. Sorry for not being able to convey the information in time. Sometimes the gears of fate work strangely. Later, to compensate the village chief, I signed a contract to sell myself. By chance, he trusted him and let him into the inner circle of the village. From there, he easily obtained evidence to overthrow the darkness. But after my daughter left, I lost contact with the outside world and had to find another opportunity. The above is my father's confession. In the back of the notebook, he recorded information about each kidnapped girl, including her name, physical description, hometown, the time she was kidnapped, and which family in the village she ended up marrying into. If a girl's name is crossed out, it means she was abused to death. Below is also clearly noted the burial place. I turned over each page of my notebook, many of which were still soaked with water. One can imagine how indignant my father was when he wrote these things. Closing the book, my tears were overflowing. No matter what, I must fulfill my father's wish. I took out my phone to call the police. This evidence was enough to wipe out the village chiefs. But when I dialed the number, I was left speechless. There is no signal on the phone. Since entering the village, I have been busy looking for clues, so I have not paid attention to the mobile phone signal. A bad feeling came over me, so I ran up the mountainside south of the village. The scene before my eyes confirmed my guess. The only broadcasting station in the village was destroyed. In this remote mountainous area, within a radius of several dozen kilometers, there is only one broadcasting station. Without it, all mobile phones would not work. I used to shiver. Mind immediately think of a way to break the situation. The good news is that only the mobile network's transmission station was destroyed. Other networks are still operating normally. I can sneak into people's houses at night and borrow their phones to call the police. But I have never stolen anything. There are many livestock in the village. Just a little carelessness and you will be caught red-handed. But once caught, waiting for me will be a hell worse than death. I thought of a safer way, to ask for help from that mysterious person. That person has helped me silently many times. The time he informed me of my funeral, the time he saved me from the fire, it must have been him. Maybe he can help me contact Captain Tan. As for the identity of the mysterious person, I'm almost certain it's the young man my father saved years ago. because when he took me up the mountain last time, his running style was always tilted. That is the sign of a lame person. In his diary, my father also mentioned the young man who was injured in a mining accident and had a crippled leg. Also, my father said his house is opposite mine at the west end of the village. But there are many houses on the west end of the village. How do I know which one is his? The house of a young and a normal person is no different. Then definitely lure all the villagers out. I will identify each of them. Thinking quickly, I sneaked into the west side of the village, found a pile of straw, and lit it on fire. Then I took a few bundles of burning straw and threw them into the cattle pen. In no time, the whole village was in an uproar. Dogs and chickens were barking and their cries could be heard everywhere. Not long after, the villagers woke up in panic, saw the fire burning fiercely. Someone immediately took out a gong and beat it while shouting loudly, "Fire! Fire!" Very quickly, neighboring villagers heard the news and came from everywhere to bring water to put out the fire. I was hiding on the hill when I saw a man limping towards me. Although he walked with a limp, his actions were extremely agile. The fire was quickly extinguished by everyone's efforts. After a few curses and mumblings, the villagers went home and the village became deathly quiet again. I silently memorized the location of the man's house. Then I waited a while before going down. I was extremely excited, but I was still cautious and did not rush to acknowledge the acquaintance. Now, Captain Keen is still sleeping. I am also afraid of being caught by the villagers who come back to check the fire. I stayed up all night. It wasn't until about 10 a.m. when I saw the man limping out of the house that I suddenly appeared from a hidden corner and blocked his way. The limping man was stunned when he saw me, stood still for 2 seconds, then quickly pulled me into the house. I took the initiative to speak. "Don't worry. I checked carefully to make sure there was no one around before coming to find you." Hearing that, he breathed a sigh of relief, looked me up and down and asked, "How did you find me?" I didn't hide anything. I told the whole story of reading my father's diary, then coming up with the plan to set fire, explaining every detail. The man stood there speechless for a long time. Without waiting for him to respond, I asked again, "I want to know the truth about my father's death." He hesitated for a few seconds, sighed, "Let's go into the side room to talk. It's quieter there." With that, he led me to a side room. The room is not large by rural standards, but very clean and tidy.
Furniture, electronics are meticulously arranged, even controlled. The books on the table are also neatly arranged, parallel to each other. I secretly thought to myself, this guy definitely has severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. We sat down at the tea table. He took out his phone to look at the time. I have to go to the mine before 11 o'clock, so let me talk quickly. I nodded, paying attention to the phone next to him. He spoke again. "My name is Lu Xin Wang. You can call me Uncle Shin. Your father once saved my life. Now I can only repay you. Whatever you want to know, I will tell you everything." While he was speaking, a graceful and elegant woman entered with tea and cakes. He introduced, "That is my wife." I accepted the tea and greeted her politely. "Hello, Auntie." The woman smiled back and left the room, leaving the two of us alone. I didn't beat around the bush and asked, "Who killed your father?" Lu Xianguang sighed and replied, Your father discovered some bad things that the village chief did and was retaliated against. The village chief colluded with some villagers and threw your father down an abandoned well, then beat him to death with rocks. I begged for mercy, but the village chief had lost his mind, and his words were like village law. No one dared to disobey. I swallowed my saliva. Even though I had already guessed this outcome, hearing it with my own ears still hurt like a knife. Your father discovered the village chief's human trafficking, right? His face changed instantly, staring at me in surprise. How do you know? I replied, the day you took me behind the mountain, I accidentally discovered the secret in the mine. Combined with my father's diary, everything was very clearly connected. Lu Shanguang sighed. That year, my father was killed because of that. Those evil spirits, after throwing my father down the ancient well, not only broke rocks, but also poured boiling water on Uncle Tung's painful screams. That day, I still can't forget. Speaking up to hear, Lu Xianguang's voice choked up, his eyes were red, and I felt like thousands of fiery needles were piercing my heart. My throat tightened. In that tense atmosphere, my stomach couldn't help but growl again. Only then did I realize that I had eaten nothing since last night except a few cookies and had been starving for a long time. Uncle Than smiled and said, "Let me ask my aunt to cook you some noodles." I replied, "Then I'll bother you, Uncle." As soon as Uncle Fan walked out of the room, I immediately picked up the phone he left on the table and sent a short message to Captain Tan. Luckily, his phone had signal. I was very careful not to reveal the whole plan to him. After all, he is still a person from Lingyu village. I cannot be sure that he is completely on my side. As soon as I sent the message and put the phone back in its original place, the god turned back and smiled. "The noodles are cooking, just wait a moment." I tried to stay calm and replied, "Thank you, Uncle." When the hot bowl of egg noodles was brought up, I immediately devoured it. Lu Shanguang smiled at me. "Uncle is not at ease leaving you here alone. Let's do this." I texted to ask for a day off. My heart suddenly became tense. Could it be that he discovered something? He kept me here to monitor, but I had told Captain Kin not to text back, so he probably hadn't discovered it yet. The construction site agreed, he continued while I was thinking. I nodded and continued eating the noodles. The atmosphere in the room gradually became magical. After a few minutes of silence, I spoke up to break the silence. "Uncle Shin, how was my father discovered back then?" Lu Shanguang, Uncle Tung planned to take advantage of the new year when the village guarded the room was loose, and he escaped. But unexpectedly, on the night of the 30th of Tet, the village chief still sent someone to guard the village gate, and Uncle Tung was caught right there. I already know what happened next. After hearing that, I felt very uncomfortable, and at the same time I had doubts. How could a person who was willing to sacrifice his youth and endure for more than 10 years act so rashly? I put down my chopsticks, looked at the magician coldly, and said, "Magician, actually, that year, my father did not risk his life to cross the fence, but was betrayed by you, right?" His expression immediately changed. Before I could refute, I continued, "From the moment you appeared in front of my house, I never asked you how you entered the village, because I already knew from your father that outside the main gate that was guarded, there was a small secret path into the village. Not only that, he also knew which orphanage I was in and called me to come home to show his filiality. For my father, my daughter's safety and the evidence in his hands
were equally important secrets. If he can tell you which welfare institution I'm in, there's no reason to hide the contents of the evidence from you." Lu Shanguang's expression kept changing, his lips moving as if trying to arrange his words. I interrupted and concluded, "Back then, my father placed his hopes on you. He was crippled in the leg but not forbidden to leave the village, making him the most suitable person to carry the message. But you betrayed his trust." Uncle Lu's facial muscles twitched. After a few seconds of silence, he let out a sigh, seemingly resigned. "When did you doubt me?" "Since I saw you." Uncle Lu laughed self-deprecatingly and sadly said, "Even you look down on me, thinking that a cripple like me is not worthy of such a beautiful and gentle wife." I shook my head. It's not that, but the way she looked at him was distant and scared. Uncle Lu was stunned, and his face was gloomy. I didn't expect that after living together for so many years, she could still not truly accept me. In my heart, I cursed a girl who was forced to come back and still expected him to love and accept him. Based on what? After a moment of silence, Uncle Lu suddenly looked at me and calmly said, "You're stalling for time, waiting for the police to arrive, right?" I jumped. My eyes immediately became alert. Uncle Lu continued, "My phone was a little off balance. You must have used it to call the police just now, right?" My heart rang alarm bells. I remember his compulsive behavior very clearly. I didn't expect it to be so serious that even the slightest deviation of the phone could be detected. At this point, it is useless to deny. I looked straight at Uncle Lu and said seriously, "Uncle Lu, please confess and try to get the maximum leniency from the law." Uncle Lu replied, "It's useless. Once the village's crimes are exposed, all the participants will not be able to escape death. But it's not easy to accuse us." I asked uneasily, "What do you mean?" Uncle Lu's eyes flashed with ferocity. "If they can kill your father, they can also deal with you without leaving a trace. As for the secret in the mine, let it be buried deep underground forever without evidence. The police won't be able to do anything to us." His words immediately reminded me of the large amount of explosives in the mine. It turned out that the village chief had been preparing for this day for a long time. Uncle Lu saw my heavy expression and continued, "I just informed the village chief. He should be here soon. Even if the police came to the village, it would take at most an hour, during which time you guys could erase all the evidence." I felt my heart sink to the bottom. It turned out that Uncle Lu had pretended to take a leave just now to inform the village chief. Right after those words, the village chief walked in.
As soon as he saw me, his old face immediately became fierce, and he rushed up to slap me twice hard. Slap, slap. I felt my cheeks sting, my eyes blurred, and the village chief roared. "Everyone in the village is from the Lingyu family, from the same bloodline. You and your father, for the sake of an outsider, intend to denounce your relatives? You are truly worse than animals, not human. Even if we die in the afterlife, the Lingyu family's ancestors will not forgive you." I laughed coldly. "Ridiculous. You Lingyu family members are human, but the girls who were captured are not human? What right do you have to decide other people's lives and take away their freedom?" The village chief's hair trembled with anger. He kicked me a few times and shouted, You don't expect to die so easily. Once she's done with the police, I'll teach her a lesson until she dies." Immediately after, 2 villagers dragged me out, tying my hands behind my back with ropes. The village chief was still not satisfied, leaned close to my ear, gritted his teeth, and said,
Don't worry, when the time comes, I'll let the ugly and sick people in the village deal with you one by one, so you can slowly die in despair and regret." While he was imagining me begging for forgiveness, I suddenly burst out laughing, a cold laugh full of contempt. The village chief glared. "What are you laughing at?" I replied, "Laughing at you, you idiot. Come to this country and still dream of dealing with me? Do you think you can be here because of Liu Shengguang's news? No, it's because I wanted you to come here." The village chief's expression immediately became serious. "Ridiculous. You're about to die and you still want to scare people? Really?" Just as I was about to smile, a loud siren rang out in the village. The village chief heard it and his face immediately changed color. Liu Shengguang broke out in cold sweat and stammered, "How is that possible? It's only been 10 minutes. How did the police get there so fast?" "Who said I just called the police this morning? Last night I snuck into your house and used your phone to report it." Uncle Liu shouted, "Then why did you risk coming to see me? If I didn't come, how could the village chief offer himself to the door?" I looked at the village chief again, my voice mocking. "I guess the mine detonator button in the mine is still in your hand, right?" The village chief's face changed. You dare to scheme against me?" He turned to shout at Liu Shengguang, "Kill her! Kill this SI!" After speaking, Trang Lang led the villagers to rush towards the mine. I looked at his back, my eyes filled with pity. No matter how he tried to save him, it was too late. Captain Tan of the province had mobilized special forces to control the entire village. The road leading to the mine was cut off. The village chief could no longer detonate the mine. Only then did Uncle Liu suddenly come to his senses. I deliberately left the phone a little off balance so that you would find out and inform the village chief to come here. I neither confirmed nor denied it. Last night, I had made an appointment with Captain Tan and made it clear that I would hide the evidence next to the dry well. Even if I died, the evidence would not be lost. Because the Lingyu village was so crowded, Captain Qin had to ask for support from the provincial armed forces, and they had to arrive at the village at 11 a.m. at the earliest. Therefore, we planned to act at exactly 12 noon. But before that, I had to lure the village chief away from the mine. A selfish and suspicious person like him would never leave the mine detonation task to someone else. My house was at the western end of the village, the farthest from the mine. The village chief could not detonate the mine himself from here. Liu Shengguang's eyes were filled with surprise. Was it worth it for me to do this? I might die too. I suddenly lowered my eyes, my voice sad. I was afraid of death. Very, very afraid. But there were some things that had to be done by someone else. Moreover, I had promised Zhang that I would definitely save her. I raised my head to look out the window. Through the dim sunlight, I seemed to see my father smile. At that moment, I felt my father's pain before he died and completely understood what he had done. Because in life, there are always things more important than life. At least I can face death without regrets. Liu Shengguang looked at me angrily and gritted his teeth and said, "I really regret calling to send you back to the village." I sighed. Maybe this is fate. I brought you back to the village because I wanted to make up for betraying your father. But you must understand that if it weren't for my betrayal, there wouldn't be today. Liu Shengguang's face trembled. He shouted, "What can I do? The whole village is my family. If the crime is exposed, half of the village will be shot. Among them are my father, my uncles, and even my close friends from childhood. I am an SI. If it weren't for the girls being captured, I would not be able to get married. In this village, men without descendants will be cursed for the rest of their lives." I laughed coldly. "You are just a selfish person. Even if you save me, it is only to ease your conscience." Liu Shengguang's hands clenched, veins popping out. He didn't say anything more and pulled out a sharp dagger. Seeing him step by step towards me, I closed my eyes and waited for death. But a second later, I felt hot blood spurting on my face without any pain. I opened my eyes in horror and saw Liu Shangguang plunge the knife into my neck again. He had committed suicide. I looked at the body lying next to me in silence. Liu Shangguang knew he could not escape his crime, but he had left me a way to live. Perhaps to repay my father for saving him years ago. I sighed, intending to get up when the door was kicked open. Immediately after, fully armed soldiers rushed in. Behind them was Uncle Qin's worried face. Seeing that I was okay, Uncle Qin clearly breathed a sigh of relief. He immediately walked over, carefully undressed me, and reproached, "Why doesn't this girl value her own life so much?" I hurriedly asked, "Jing, how are those girls?" Uncle Qin had subdued the village chief, and another team had also found 3 girls imprisoned in the mine. Hearing this, I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I led the Qin team to dig up the buried evidence. The number of people trafficked, the length of time, all of these were difficult for even a veteran police officer like Uncle Qin to accept. And at the edge of the forest above the mine, I found the burial place of the girls as my father had said. Each pile of colorful mushrooms was in disarray, and underneath were each body. The once beautiful woman has now forever lain here. Thank you for listening to the story with the Submerged Archives. If you find it interesting, please give us a like and a subscription to the channel. Thank you.